Now the question, you know what positivist theory is. The question now is that when you need to use a case study to validate that theory. So we usually data analysis or content analysis for case study. You can also use regression, covariance-based SCM as part of a field survey. You can use ANOVA T-student as part of an experiment. Which approach you need to take to validate a theory? So what happens, how do you usually, start, validating a theory, a proposal? What happens is that most of the time, you're affiliated with an organization, you have an internship, or for some reason you are interested to improving Y. So either the organization wants to improve a variable in the organization, or you are interested, in Y. So, and in your proposal, in your chapter 1, you claim that Y is important because of this, that. Usually mention some factors after Y, that if you improve Y, for example, IT investment, firm performance will be improved, employee performance will be improved. And you talk about them in the proposal. After that, you do a literature review to figure out the antecedents of Y. What factor, increasing what fact, improving what factors will improve Y. So you try to figure out, to extract those antecedents using a literature review. Two things can happen here. Either you don't find any antecedents, or there are a few. Whenever this happens, I tell a student, okay, I don't believe this happened. You need to go to adjacent literature, neighboring literature, and do a study there. For example, if it's about blockchain is trying to improve trust. It tries to improve transparency. Do the literature, go and review the literature of, trust and transparency. Perhaps you can find some constructs there. If after all these you have found that, we don't have, any antecedents, the phenomena is so new, then you have to develop the theory. You need to identify these X's, these constructs. Then you need to go for exploratory case study or grounded theory. However, if using the literature, you have been able to find all these antecedents, then you need, or some antecedents, then you need to go for testing the theory. If you want to test that theory, so Y, X1, X2, X10 is already in your, they are already in your literature review. You have found them in the literature. Here, you need to go for either explanatory case study, field survey, or experiment. But which of these? So theory development, first of all, is quite, I guess, easy. For example, assume that you want to figure out the antecedents of AI, artificial intelligence maturity in the organization. You go and study case 1. You find X1, X2, and X3 in case 1, X1, X3, and X4 in another case, and some other construct in another case, and then you generalize them to the factors that can influence AI maturity: X1, X2, X3, and X4. So this is how theory development usually works. But if you want to test the theory, the question is which approach you need to take. You need to show the theory to someone who is experienced, either your supervisor or the company supervisor, someone who knows the domain quite well. Then he can say, so if he or she says, I cannot think of other antecedents, I believe you have found everything, then you need to answer one question. Do X1, X2, and X3, all of them are introduced in one paper? Then you have no choice. You need to go for another study. But if, or you can try to figure out, some antecedents of X1, X2, and X3 if you don't find them in the you haven't found them in the literature. But if you have found them in different papers, then you're good. You need to conduct a field survey with a questionnaire and a sample that is larger than perhaps around 100. So you cannot go for an explanatory case study with just 2 or 3 or 6 people, six sample size of 6. When do you go for an explanatory case study? First, you have reasons to believe that Yx or x2 cannot be measured in a reliable way using questionnaire, because in questionnaire you usually ask 1 to 3 questions about each construct to figure out the value of that construct in that case for that unit of analysis. So measuring that would be quite unreliable. You have literature that supports that, or there are rare cases that these relationships do not hold. Then you have no choice. You can say that, okay, we have a rare case, I can go for explanatory case study. I cannot measure it very well. I have to dig in and have a lot of interviews to measure, to have a good value for Y. Or the supervisor says that, oh, there are several missing antecedents here. We have X10, X9 that are not mentioned here. In these cases, you go for an explanatory case study. And your goal is to disconfirm the theory. So you would say that, oh, there are missing constructs here, or these relationships do not work. This is your goal. So after an explanatory case study, for example, you figure out X1 is supported, X2 is not supported. You show that using a different, icon for the arrow, a different symbol. You figure out perhaps that X3 is supported in an opposite way. It's completely different than what you suggested in your hypothesis. And you may find even new constructs or new relationship between constructs. So these are, the kind of outcome that you would like to see as a result of an explanatory case study. So let's have some, questions here. Okay, I give you around 30 seconds to read this and then suggest a right approach for validating this theory. Do you have any ideas? Any answers here? So first of all, you have found each antecedent in one paper. That shows that you have a theory. That means you don't need to do an exploratory case study. So that one is removed. There is a theory here. Then we have some antecedents here, and each of them are in one paper. So good. I can go for testing this theory. I don't need to go and find another theory. The homological model does not exist in any paper. But your company supervisor cannot even come up with a missing antecedent. So everything here, if a missing antecedent was there, then you would say that, oh, there's some missing antecedent here, I can go for an explanatory case study. But here, no one can come up with a missing antecedent, so it's better to go for a field survey. And by field survey, I mean something like this. See, that's what you need to do. You need to design a questionnaire with 3 questions for each construct. You see, for example, shared language, for example, is somewhere here, is a dimension of this construct. there are 3 questions for that. Shared cognition, there are 4 questions for that. For structural social capital, we have 3 questions for information reaction, and here we have 2 questions for structural positioning. Try to have 3 questions. That's very important. And then you send them the survey to different, distribute the survey to all CIOs in this case. This is perhaps the unit of analysis, CIO TMT. So these authors, they send it to 1,000 CIOs, and only 206 CIOs returned the response. So the percentage rate is around 20%, which is okay, in top journals. And then PLS is used for data analysis. This is quite easy to do. Don't think that PLS analysis is quite difficult. And you see that these are supported, and these relationships are not supported. So that's the kind of mentality that you need to have for this kind of studies. How about this one? First of all, it says that you have created a new theory. So it's not going to be an exploratory case study. The previous study claims that measuring alignment is mostly reliable if executives are interviewed and cross-checked. So this construct that you see here, alignment, cannot be easily measured using a field survey questionnaire. So you have enough, support from the literature for that. You cannot easily ask them to just give a value from 1 to 7, like what the previous study did. So, and you need to double check everything here. You have no choice but to go for an explanatory case study here, because you need interviews to find a value of high or low for alignment in one case, and in another case, and in another case if it's a multiple case study. Okay, so you can see here that these authors, they were not able to find relationship between these constructs as the moderators, but they were not able even to disconfirm, to reject the theory, because they have had 9 cases. Whenever alignment was high, communication was also high. When alignment was low, communication was also low. So they could not reject this hypothesis, so they have to support it. If they could see that when alignment is high, communication is low for 2 or 3 cases, then they could say that, oh, this relationship is not supported by data, it's rejected by the data actually. Okay, so that's how you need to measure this concept. This is the kind of table that you need to create at the end. So let's do this exercise, and then we go for a kind of short break. So there is a high pressure for having a rapid, high quality decision process in high velocity environment in a semiconductor industry. The literature does not suggest how this, rapid decision making can happen. How can we increase the decision making speed? You have a pool of CEOs. What methodology do you use? So you see here, you don't see any theories, huh? There are no theories. What should be the answer? After literature review, you don't have any theories. It's an exploratory case study or a grounded theory. So you see here in this case, Eisenhardt, he has a decision speed construct. He tried to use qualitative data to measure this decision speed. In each case, for example, she had 7 or 8 cases, and the decision speed was from 3 months to 5 years. So she had this from the interviews, and in the interviews from the qualitative data, she also found new constructs like real-time information existence. And then she was also able to find a score for each of these. And that score had a positive relationship with decision. That means when this one was high, decision speed was also high. So that means there is a kind of positive relationship between the two. And she also found support from data and from the literature that improving real-time information will improve accelerated cognitive processing, and that will improve decision speed. These are the F that I mentioned for you. So she introduced a new theory here. These constructs were not, we didn't know about them at the beginning of the study. The literature would not talk about them. The decision speed was not discussed in the literature. So these constructs were found as a result of analyzing the interviews with people. So this is another quite interesting method for some of you. So keep that in mind. Okay, I guess I have 1 or 2 questions, and then we can go for a break. What's your methodology here? So first of all, we have been able to find all antecedents of cloud adoption intention. So we don't need an exploratory case study here. Each antecedent is found in one paper. So the great thing is that you're not all in one paper. I don't need to go for another study. The nomological model does not exist in any paper. Again, I don't need to go for another study. But your company supervisor believes this model does not work for the financial industry. She or he would say that there's some other missing constructs here. What methodology would you use? So here, if you go for a field survey, you only check these relationships. You cannot find those missing constructs. Of course, you can go for, for a field survey, but it's better to go for an explanatory case study where you can find new constructs and some sort of, relationship that are disputed here. This is the goal. You want to ensure, you want to prove to everyone that, the literature was wrong. The literature was wrong to have this. The literature missed this. The literature missed this, or they missed having reliability. Okay, this is the last one. Yes, in explanatory case study, we use interviews. In exploratory case study, we use interviews. In field survey, we don't have interviews. We only have questionnaires and some, values, scores for each construct from 1 to 7. Okay. What approach would you use here? So here you see you have 2 constructs, but there are missing constructs in between the two. You want to find constructs in between the ransomware attack and strategic risk. Exactly, you need to use an exploratory case study, and this is done by Marnik. He has found ways to measure the severity of the ransomware attack using 2 dimensions, and for each dimension, he tried to provide some more antecedents. And you see he has found some constructs that can moderate this relationship. So it's an exploratory case study, or it can also be called a grounded theory. You don't need to know the difference between the two for your thesis. If there is a problem, just send me an email. Okay, you can discuss this yourself. In this case, we have all constructs in one theory, in one paper. What can you do with this? You cannot go for a field server because these relationship and constructs are already existing in one paper. So what can you do here? What you can do is to try to find the antecedents of these 3 constructs. So it's sort of a kind of hybrid case study where you try to explain. These parts are explanatory. You try to figure out if they work in the case of audit agilities, because agility and constructs related to agility are related, or they exist, in the area of software engineering. But for auditing, we are not sure if these 3 would work good enough. So not only you check this as an explanatory case study, you also go for an exploratory case study to find other antecedents of these constructs. So that's another approach that can be taken. Okay, so when you're back, we continue. Let's have a 5 minutes of break. I stop with, recording. I pause the video. So you use explanatory case study when you want to check causal relationships, and your goal is to test the theories. You use exploratory case study when you need to even define the questions, you want to propose new constructs, and at the end, you want to build a new theory. So these are, your goals. These can be your goals for either explanatory case study or exploratory case study. So one question is asked here is that why is a positivist case study mostly used by a student? Or in reality, why a positivist explanatory case study is mostly used by a student? Is it easier than other kinds of research? Yeah, it can be way easier during the interviews because you already have a theory, you already have the construct. With an exploratory case study, you have to go and build new constructs. But most of our students, they don't know enough theories. They don't have the theoretical sensitivity to build theories. So it would be difficult for them to come up with constructs from the data and from the, from any kind of data that they have. So exploratory case study, grounded theory would be quite difficult for these students. On the other hand, they usually have 7, 8, possible interviewees. The internships, the company supervisor usually give them this amount of, interviewees. So they have access to 7, 8 interviews, not to 100 or 150 respondents. Therefore, they go for a positivist explanatory case study. They try to create a theory. Then for each theory, they can easily have a questionnaire to just ask the question to get a score for that construct. So then also, although they need to ask some other question, but writing down the data analysis section would be way easier in comparison to other types of. So if you go for a field survey, for example, you need to run regression, PLS analysis, things like that. And because of that, the students would say that, oh, this is way easier. I can just check that if the 2 constructs, If both of them are high, if one of them is high and the other one is low, I can say that this is disconfirmed. That's all. So you don't need, a high statistical analysis knowledge, to be able to do, the data analysis of this. And it also create networks for you. You interview 7 people. So that can be quite interesting. It enlarges the network of people around you. So these are the reasons I believe they use it. Okay.